All right, I want to welcome back somebody who's been with us two times, even when we were like teeny weeny, like pygmy channel. We had Gary Byrne on a couple times, and yes, this isn't really, I guess, the Joe Rogan show, but this interview will be probably synopsized in American greatness. We're going to broach some topics that are more related to the current strife over in Washington, D.C., and of course, Minnesota, and police citizen violence. Gary Byrne is a former Secret Service officer. He served under presidents the first President Bush, President Clinton, and the second President Bush at the beginning. Correct?
Yes.
And you have two books. I think I have both of them. Let me see if I can get both of them with my one hand here. So he has Secret of the Secret Service. This came out I think three
Yeah.
years ago,
Yeah.
and Crisis of Character, which came out I think 2 years before that.
All right.
So I have reviews of that way back in the archives of the channel, and you can take a look at that. And the first two interviews deal with those. So, Gary, there's been obviously a huge amount of turmoil in the country, and currently, I like if you're any corporation, you're supposed to now send out an email bowing down to the BLM movement and their various other woke people. But you having been someone who was with the Secret Service uniformed at the White House, you probably have a different perspective on this. Um, I want to start out with this question though. The last few times we spoke, I focused on issues pertaining to the Secret Service and your time working under President Clinton. However, we've seen under Donald Trump a war between the White House Correspondents Association and his communication staff. How'd you compare that to the interactions under Bush and Clinton?
So, excellent question, and I say that because there is a huge contrast. So, like so many things, I can give you examples of both. So President Bush's rep relationship with the press was the first President Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush. So this is the early 1990s. They were very hostile towards him. Not like today. I mean, when I say hostile, I mean the way they treat President Trump has taken on a whole new kind of very disconcerting, very poor attitude towards the president. Um, but they didn't really treat President uh, H.W. Bush very well either. And this is let me kind of jump forward. It really aggravated the crap out of me when George Herbert Walker Bush died, and all these left wing supposed reporters who were just, obviously just kind of part of the Democratic Party, in my opinion. They came out and were saying all these nice things about him, and he wasn't that bad of a guy. That's not how they treated him. They treated him like crap. They treated his wife like crap. They 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 were always buffooning him. They were always attacking his vice president Dan Quayle. The full court press was on against them because they were conservatives. What was a conservative at the time, and it doesn't even. I mean, it pales in comparison to today the way they treat President Trump. But their relationship with him was hostile. And then Bill Clinton comes along. He's very charming. He's young. He identifies with a lot of men and women in this country who were against the Vietnam War because and that's kind of the telling thing about President Clinton. When we talk about him, we usually talk about his bizarre sex life and bad choices. But the other thing too about him, which really struck home to me, was the way he evaded the draft, and he really did evade the draft. He just used that charming. He's a good writer. I'm sure you've seen the letter he wrote that colonel, and basically, said that he was doing this, writing the letter, and hoping that the time would pass because he did not want to take the chance of getting injured.
Mhm.
So anyway, So now, as hostile as the press was to the first President Bush, when Clinton came along, they were on both sides on any given day. For instance, there used to be a reporter. Her name was Trudy. I don't remember her last name right now. She was part of the White House press corps, and one of the reasons she was kept on, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I forget the news agency. I want to say she might have worked for UP, something like that. Anyway, UPI or something. But
United
she was
Press.
this. Yeah, I forget exactly which one, but if you looked up her name, if you just looked up the name Trudy, White House press corps, it would pull it up. She was this kind of older lady, kind of nutty, disheveled looking. I mean, she could have easily walked out of the press corps and walked across the street to Lafayette Park and looked like a homeless person. I mean, that's the truth. That's just the way she was. And so one of the reasons Trudy was kept on, because and when I say kept on, she was so bizarre in her behavior at night when we locked up the press. The press goes home about 10 o'clock on a normal night, and they start leaving around 8:30. Anyway, the Secret Service Uniform Division secures the press lobby. And many nights, myself sometimes and my coworkers, we learned we used to have to go in every cubby hole, every cubby hole, every closet, go down underneath the press lobby because it used to be a pool. You knew that, right? So underneath the decking is all the phone lines and all the electronic wires and computers to run the press lobby. And I hated going down there. I am telling you, I felt like it was the most dangerous place in the world. When you walk down in there, I kid you not, the room temperature went up 20 degrees. It was so, I mean, I just didn't understand why it didn't just spontaneously combust. Anyway, you used to have to go down there and look for it. Trudy would hide. And when she got caught and got in trouble, you could guarantee that 2 days later, there'd be a very favorable story out about Bill Clinton. And that's why they kind of kept her on. And then there were reporters that challenged Bill Clinton. It was not, the Clinton machine hadn't completely corrupted them as I see it now. And this is not opinion. This is what I observed, as you know.
Right.
And so anyway, go ahead. Did you have something else?
So yeah, I think the under second President Bush, and I don't really like any of the, like, I think the only president I liked in the past like 50 years, like probably I was like not even born, like Nixon kind of seems like, I guess, real. But
Yeah.
I mean, but I didn't like either Bush, and I think Clinton was, when I was a kid, we just liked him because he was kind of a joke machine for
Right.
comedians, but that was it.
Yes.
Like, I think majority of them were just bad presidents. So
Yeah.
this president has been relatively good. However, so this is related. During the
Right.
coronavirus saga, the press repeatedly attempted to impugn the president's handling of both the pandemic and his own personal health. In fact, I argued with my dad about it yesterday because he said this hydroxychloroquine could kill you, even though the
Yeah.
study's been revealed to be fake. As someone who observed presidents in their off-camera moments, how much should this have actually been a concern regarding Trump's health?
It shouldn't have been a concern at all. But see, the difference is, and you've kind of, I'm just guessing that this is kind of why you asked the question. No matter what it is, if President Trump had said eating 2 scrambled eggs and washing it down with a Budweiser will fix this, and it turned out he was right, they would hide it. It's the I think it might be the first President Trump joke. President Trump cures cancer, and then the left comes out and says, "How dare you take away my right to die in a painful death?"
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter what he says. I mean, because they're going to attack him no matter what. I mean, just no matter what. I mean, just look what they did when he walked across the street to the church the other day. Which, I mean, I've been in St. John's 50 times. I stood outside, inside, with every president, with dignitaries for funerals, for, anyway. So no matter what he does, the left is the mainstream media is going to attack him. It really doesn't matter. If he had walked out there and the protesters that were dispersed. And you can ask me anything you want about that. It's subject matter expert for that. I've actually been there, done that in the same spot we're talking about. Different angry people, probably their parents. But
Yeah.
so here's the thing: if he had walked out there and hugged them and shook their hands before he got to the church, what would they have been saying? He's soft on crime, or he's soft on anarchy, or he's
He's trying to, I guess, appease them. Yeah.
Right. But see, that's who he's not. He's not. There's a social media. I think it's on Facebook. I see it all the time, or on Instagram. It's a meme, but it's true. And they show a picture. Usually it goes like this: they show a picture of President Obama, and they say he was an eloquent liar. Obama was an eloquent liar, and Trump is brutal with the truth, and that's what it is. But see, for somebody like me, that appeals to me. Just tell me how it is. Pull the Band-Aid off. Let's get moving forward. So I don't have any qualms with what he's done or what he's doing. I really don't, because I've seen behind the curtain. I've seen behind the curtain, and I know that he's getting a lot of good stuff done. Right now they're trying to call him a racist. They always do, and they're trying to blame him for the civil unrest. Name me another president that has done more to change sentencing guidelines when it comes to minorities.
Right, and
Nobody's done.
he's actually been criticized very heavily by traditional GOP law and order people for that.
Right. I was
Yeah.
taken back by it at first, but here's the thing: it doesn't really affect me. It's okay, and it's a changing thing. It's a changing thing, and I get. It's like it's a simple analogy. When you go to the beach and a big wave comes in, sometimes people that shouldn't be caught up in that big wave get caught up in it, and that happens. That the one woman that they kind of used as their poster child that they released. Listen, I understand that. We're all human. And should people like her get a break? Sure. Are there people going to slip through the cracks? Yes. But at this point, does it even matter? Because some of these liberal governors are just letting these people walk. I mean, they want to jail me or you for trying to go into a restaurant and get a meal, but they're going to let these criminals out because they don't want them to catch the virus, which I don't understand. So, but anyway, go ahead.
So we're like getting to this issue of the police citizen virus. So what's happened over the past few weeks, there's once again a flare up of civil unrest due to police citizen interaction or interracial violence. There are now reverberations of both protests and riots in Canada and in the UK. And I think I also saw in Nigeria, they're trying to charge the embassy or something. Knowing what you do about the Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd cases, what was your professional reaction? And then second question within that, do you think this current episode and the changes it brings could be a Pompeii-like disaster for the law enforcement profession?
Yeah, so the law enforcement's been getting hammered for many years. I can't blame it all on President Obama, but I mean, my experience is that he was the first president that he would do two things. He would kind of do left hand kind of compliments about law enforcement because they were protecting him, and then he would make comments like these comments about. And don't let me get too off track here, but just give me a little leeway with this.
Sure.
When President Obama was still in office, he made this comment about stopping the program between the DOD and law enforcement, where the law enforcement in the United States could get surplus DOD equipment, armored personnel carriers and stuff. And here's the thing. I get that people don't want their police to look like a military occupation, but also too, you can go on many social media, YouTube, websites, Google, whatever. Google edged weapons, injured police officers. I'm telling you, if you don't throw up, you don't have a soul. I mean, I've been there. I've done it. I know. Listen, I don't want the police riding around the park with kids in it in armored personnel carriers. But when they have to go into Watts to serve a search warrant at a drug house, yeah, I want them to be protected. And the way Obama that's one of his backhand. Well, we're going to take that equipment away from him, and but here's the thing: what do you know about it? It's like my just to give you an idea of how he has no clue what he's talking about. It was almost as ridiculous as when Bill Clinton got elected and they were going to immediately open up the military to homosexuals, gays in the military. They didn't have a clue. I think I may have had this discussion with you before, and I'll just recap real quick.
I know you mentioned it in I think one of your books about your time in the Air Force and encountering people.
Right.
But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the Clintons going to jam it down the military's throat. We're going to have gays in the military. So it's the Clinton staffers that are pushing this forward, who were never in the military, get a tour of a couple naval ships and military bases. The bases weren't too big of a deal. The Marine Corps was very resistant. When they got on a Navy submarine and saw what these guys, men and women, well, men at the time, maybe there were some women, and that was another issue. When you realize how big of a space you live in, and you literally hot bunk, you and I could be both machinist mates. You'd work one 12-hour shift, I'd work the other one. When I got off, you'd get out of the bunk and I'd get in it. That's called hot bunking. That's what, and they had no idea. Literally, they were so stunned and were so naive that after they did their tours, they were making these statements publicly, and then all of a sudden, Rahm Emanuel or the chief of staff at the time was like, "Shut up! You're making a point for it not to work." And so when you go back to this thing with President Obama and this surplus military equipment. Does the military need an Abrams tank? No. But do they need, 15 and 20-year-old armored personnel carriers? Sure, they do. There's times when they do need them. Absolutely. Is it good to have them for training? Absolutely. So that's just one of the ways that he softened up. It's like he's thanking the law enforcement. At the same time, he's slapping them in the back of the head. And when the far left saw that, they jumped on it. The mainstream media jumps on it. They love to bash law enforcement. It's taken on a tenor now and a speed that is it is changing things, and it is dangerous. It's dangerous for the law enforcement, and it's dangerous for the citizens. Because this is important for everybody to understand. Every police department in the world, I don't care where it is. I don't care if it's a communist country. I don't care if it's the United States, Canada. All right, let's say United States, Canada, Western, Germany, NATO. Let's say NATO. Mm-hmm. Every police department, civilian and military, the first rule that you learn, what the first thing you have to acknowledge that you're going to do is come home alive. You're going to go home. So
right, but to steer back to there was this whole issue with Arbery where people, like, I remember in the first couple days people were saying, well, this was basically a lynching, which was not a police lynching. No. It was technically because they were a retired police officer and his son. And then the George Floyd case, I think, was, if you look at the footage, very clear cut in my opinion. But of course, you've had to arrest. You've had to arrest airmen in the Air Force. You've had to arrest civilians in the White House, and I believe in the air marshals. You probably had to deal with other civilians.
Sure.
So your take on those two cases?
So the first one is just a train wreck to start with. So it's a guy that it looks like it started out. And again, it's the way the mainstream media tries to paint it. They try to paint it as there's just a guy out for a walk or a jog. And it turns out he might have been doing some vandalism or stealing. He got confronted. It went bad. But here's does it look like it could be racism? Yeah, but here's the thing. It's hard to tell. It's hard to say what racism is. And here's what I mean by that. When I have discussions like this, I'm going to tell you flat out, I'm not sure what racism is. And here's why I say that. Because I don't give a crap what you look like. I don't care what your religion is. I don't care where you came from, where your parents came from. Here's what it's about, and it's really simple. It's about behavior. It's about behavior. It's about how you behave. Now, the first one where the guy gets shot and he dies, was that in North Carolina or
Georgia?
Where was Georgia? Thank you. So they didn't scoop him up out of the library. Now, I'm not saying what happened isn't wrong. It is wrong, but you have to look at both sides. He started out doing something wrong. He got challenged. Now he's in fear for his life. And the one guy has a gun. They starting to tussle, and what happens, and shots are fired. They're both in the wrong in certain ways. It's going to come out in court eventually. The second one, this is a little bit more tricky because I want you, as I'm talking to you, I want you and your listeners, your viewers and listeners, to picture in your mind, what was George Floyd? Was that his name?
Correct.
I want you to picture him on the ground. He's on the ground up against an SUV. Am I right? And there's 3 or 4 police officers behind him, and that one officer that's accused of murdering him is at his head. And when that officer looks up and clearly sees that he's being videoed, what was his reaction? 0, right?
Yeah.
Didn't care. So what I'm telling you is the minute I saw that video, the first thing I said to myself is they know each other. They have a relationship. This is not normal. This is not an arrest. They're not arresting him. I don't care what the media tells you. I don't care that they were in uniform. I don't care the way they were holding him. He should have been in handcuffs. He could have easily been in handcuffs in less than 15 seconds. Now, I don't know. Again, this is very important. We don't know what happened before the video. We don't even know what's happening in entirety in the video because you can't see what the other officers are doing. But there's a personal relationship there. It only took about 24 hours for that to come out. Somebody found a nightclub owner or somebody that worked in a bar that said that they used to work together. There's a relationship there. Now, I think it's possible there's a criminal relationship there. But I'm going to tell you, be prepared. Be prepared for a couple things. I'm going to say 2, but probably be 2 or 3. One of them is when this goes to court, there's going to be some evidence come out that shocks everybody. It doesn't give anybody a pass.
Right.
But here's the other thing.
It could reflect even worse on the officer because
it could.
Yeah, because it could be like what I think you're hinting at is that George Floyd might have had some dirt on Derek Chauvin or whatever is
right, or they could have been in. Well, what I'm saying is, I believe it's possible, and we'll see, that they could have been in a criminal enterprise together or were at one time. The other thing too is, the press is good at this. It's sort of like what I said about the first President Bush. He passes away, all of a sudden he's a saint. This guy, I don't know what his arrest record looks like, but I'm telling you, they didn't scoop this guy up out of church and throw him down behind that SUV. In other words, at some point in your life, if you're gonna continuously body surf in the ocean, if you're gonna go to Virginia Beach every year and body surf, every chance you get, you're gonna get rolled up on the beach, and you're gonna get, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If
when
you
take risks, you have to accept.
I'm not justifying what happened to him. I'm not. But I'm not convinced of how he died yet either. I mean, I know what you see. I've used that 20 times.
Well, the technique, would you say that was?
Yeah, it's legitimate. So it's you're balancing yourself because you're off balance. What they're doing is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody that tells you that the cops have no that they're completely 100% at fault and the procedures they used are incorrect and they tried to kill, that's not a legitimate statement, because one, most of the people that are saying that don't know law enforcement and have never effected arrest. I'm telling you, I have locked up people and I've seen people locked up. I mean, when you're arresting somebody, you are temporarily suspending their constitutional rights. again, never, ever in my career, in any arrest I was ever involved in, helping somebody else or myself, in the Secret Service, the Air Marshals, the Air Force, did we ever go to somebody's house or in the church or into a school and scoop? You know what I'm saying? They brought, we met because I was in law enforcement, and we crashed into each other. And just to give you an idea, I won't go into it right now, but if you have time, if I haven't told you the story about my first arrest, traffic stop in the Air Force, I'll tell you the story. And it will give you a little bit of better description of how things can go from a traffic stop to a double shit sandwich really fast. So
yeah, and I'm going to break the fourth wall for a second as the
go right
interviewer.
ahead.
Like I don't really talk about my experience. I was in the Israeli military as a military policeman for 2.5 years, and which I hated.
Incredible.
But the other thing that you were mentioning earlier with sharp objects,
Yeah.
the worst injuries that I saw happen to people, this happened before I was in the unit, but there was a female soldier who was inspecting a woman's handbag on a checkpoint, and the woman took a knife out of her garments and stabbed her in the cheek, basically. And
God.
this soldier that she stabbed was probably like 95 pounds. She
Right.
was like sort of my height, but like slender as a
Probably
rail.
19, 20 years old.
Right.
Right.
And that was, that she's left scarred for life, potentially, 2 inches
Yeah.
lower. She's dead. Carotid arteries right here.
Right.
It hit over here. So there were, and this is common to police officers. Even, I personally, I don't support what the Chinese government is doing, but if you're a
Right.
Chinese police officer, you're not dealing with different sharp objects in China. A sharp object is essentially the same issue for every law enforcement officer worldwide. Now, the other situations around it, I think there you have to examine what was the cause. And we're breaking down Floyd and Arbery and all of
Yeah.
that. And what I'm
Right.
like, so there's talking now about defunding police departments. I believe Mayor Garcetti in LA said that he's cutting billions of dollars or something. I don't know how they get billions of dollars, but from the
Yeah.
LAPD.
Yeah.
So do you think
Hundreds of
this is going
thousands.
to be like basically the beginning of Mad Max?
No, here's what it's going to end up being, in my opinion. So you're going to have to help me with this because I'm probably don't have all the details, but just recently, 2 or 3 days ago, there was somebody on social media who is, I think they're from Hollywood. It's a young woman, and she was throwing full speed with all her heart, her support for Antifa and Black Lives Matters and these rebellion, this anarchy that was going on and out in California, until they ended up in her neighborhood where her gated community was. And then all of a sudden she turned the other way. So the point
Oh,
I'm trying to make is,
I think you're talking about that NBA reporter, Chris Palmer, I think his name was.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I know
hilarious.
you'd be, yeah. So, it's easy to say that, it's easy to, it's easy to be on, it's easy uh, to be virtue signaling. Oh yes, I care for all. I don't care what they've done, or Black Lives Matter. Well, you're right. They're right. Black lives do matter, but all lives matter. And I realize when you say that, these people go berserk because they think that's racist. It's not. Again, it's not about skin color to me. It's about behavior. Their behavior is terrible. Their behavior is criminal, and their behavior, whether they know it or not, their behavior is pushing us towards communism. Now, they might not understand that, but I do. I've seen it. Listen. I've used this analogy with you before, I think, and I'm going to use it real quick. I'm walking through the park and I see a big, shiny black bench. It looks wet. It smells like paint, and there's a sign on it that says paint. I don't have to touch it. I believe it. I learn from history. I learn from other people's mistakes. I learn from other people doing things right and wrong, not necessarily mistakes, but this is what they thought was right at the time. I learn it instantly. I don't need another lesson in socialism, communism, or overtaxation. We're past overtaxation, in my opinion. Communism and socialism, it doesn't work. And you know how it ends up? It starts out with somebody like Bernie Sanders that everybody loves because he's like this cranky old guy that is cute and they want to rub his little head. And you know how it ends up? Kneeling in front of a wall and getting shot in the back of the head and pushed into a ditch. And there's plenty of examples. So when it comes to this, listen, this arrest that ended up in a death is horrendous. But let's separate. The one in Georgia is not law enforcement.
Correct.
And I'm going to make the argument here. And as this goes forward, I'm going to even stretch out a little bit and tell you that this is going to make a little bit more sense once it goes to court and more evidence comes out and stuff.
So that's like a Jimmy the Greek style prediction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Again,
usually
it's okay for me to come down on both sides or all four sides, as I say. If you give me the opportunity, I can come down on 5 sides because I'm not running for office, and I'm telling you what the truth is, and I'm just trying to link everybody together to give them a chance to see it, not see it my way, but see it from a different view. And that is what you saw those police officers doing to George Floyd.
Correct.
Am I saying it correct? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not law enforcement. They're not affecting an arrest. Again, it's something personal, something going on there. That's not law enforcement. They should have had the handcuffs would have already been on them. They would have been standing them up. They would have been patting them down, looking for weapons, and they would have been patting them down to make sure. Again, we don't know what the other altercation was. Did they have to body slam them to subdue them? And then as soon as you get him cuffed, he's your responsibility. You got to make sure you didn't injure him. If you broke his ribs, get him to the hospital. And I know, and I'm making it sound a little bit easy, but I'm going to tell you, if you give me the opportunity, I'm going to show you the example where my first traffic stop taught me so much about law enforcement. And as bad as it was, I'm glad it happened because it set me up for a life of having the ability to go from this conversation that you and I are having to the savage that I have to be to affect something. And when I say savage, I'm more talking about my time as an air marshal, but going from being a police officer, giving directions to pulling out a baton and taking your legs out because you've changed the situation, not because I changed it. And I say you, the suspect or whatever.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So George Floyd is not innocent in anything, but he did not deserve what happened to him. And again, I realize he's dead, but we have nobody has any idea what has happened yet. You think we think we know because we've seen it on video. You can't tell me what the other guy's hands were doing. You can't tell me what was said before. You can't tell me what's being said then, and we don't know what happened before that. So
yeah,
that's important stuff.
It could be like we've both said that there could have been a criminal behavior on the part of the police officer, but it might have been nothing to do with policing. It might have been due to
personal,
literal criminal behavior.
Right.
That internal affairs, not like the Civil Rights Division would have probably been.
Maybe 8 years before when they worked together, maybe Floyd, pissed off a girl that he knew. I'm telling you, when this all comes out, you're going to go, man, I didn't see that one coming. I'm not telling you I have a crystal ball. I'm telling you my experience is that that just because you see a video, okay, now I have 2 quick stories I have to tell you. Just because you see a video, that's not the story. Can I give you a quick description of what I mean?
So I think I have
we can wait.
How about put
right
a pin
ahead.
in those 2 because we have like a lot of questions. But I mean, I don't have any time limit, but
no, go right ahead.
So this is along the same line, but more towards the White House and the violence against police officers. So according to Fox, over 60 Secret Service officers were injured in the DC violence. Other officers have suffered various injuries or even been killed in Oakland. I think Oakland was a federal agent. Las Vegas, St. Louis, and elsewhere. The other networks have still attempted to portray the situation on the ground as mostly peaceful. What is your advice to your former colleagues, Donald Trump, and the decision makers in the White House on how to cope with mass unrest, apart from what has already been done? And as ex-Air Force, do you think calling in active duty military units is a step too far?
So I don't think it's a step too far. I do think it's a careful step, but I also know, I shouldn't say knowing President Trump. I don't know the president. I don't know him. I've never met him. But having studied him in the short time that he's been here as president and as he was running, he's not calling them up to use them right away. I mean, they're going to be used if he has to. He's calling them up to send a message. And here's what that message is. And again, this is I'm a 1962 guy, and a lot of people that are your audience are younger, and they use words like, "Oh, that's aggressive language," and I'm about to use some of that aggressive language.
Oh, that's encouraged here on this channel. Let's go.
Yeah. So here's what the truth is. If those anarchists are going to try to breach that fence at that White House, breach that perimeter, and we know it's possible. If they're going to injure those officers, and I don't mean just my former colleagues, I mean anywhere. And the officer that died was a federal protective officer. And I haven't seen anybody on the main street. Chris Como hasn't shed one tear for that guy. So the injuries at the White House, it's real. I never, ever, ever was involved in a big protest or any protest, big or small, where there wasn't some injury, no matter what it is. Cut fingers and, from handling people. People don't want to, I've affected arrests at the White House as simple as people just sitting down. It's passive, like a passive demonstration. They just sit down and that's it. We call it passive demonstration, or we used to call it the Gandhis. They pull a Gandhi on you. They just sit down, and and this is I'm inadvertently telling you this, and it's important. And I didn't, I want you and your listeners to understand. Anything that happens at the White House when they effect their arrest, for instance, the other day when President Trump walked across the street, before they cleared that area, they went out there and said, "We need you to disperse. We need you to disperse. We need you to disperse." Now, did you watch what I did? I did it 3 times, didn't I? They're going to tell you 3 times. And I guarantee you it's on camera. It's a government camera, but at least, or the military Waka. But they're on filming saying, "I need you to open this area, step back." And they said it 3 times. They used hand gestures in case there's language issues. If they see somebody who's looks like they're confused and they can pick up on the language, they'll get somebody, but they will make it clear that what they want. And then they give you plenty of time. They give you a couple minutes. Come on, you need to move. You need to move. The few people that, and you can tell who they are. You can see it in their faces. They're the belligerent ones. They're the tough guys. And everybody's tough at first until you get the handcuffs on them. And so anyway, and then that's when they have to use they used pepper spray. Everybody kept saying tear gas. They used pepper spray, I believe. And either way, it's a chemical agent. It's not going to kill you for the most part. It's going to irritate you. But listen, again, why are they spraying you? They're giving you plenty of time. If you want to get arrested and be seen on TV getting pepper sprayed, they'll oblige you. Listen, the federal government wants to give you what you want. If you want violence and mayhem, my old coworkers, they'll give it to you, baby. They don't want to hurt anybody, but they are not going to fail their job. They're not. They're not going to let the guy next to them get hurt. Or if the guy next to them goes down and somebody's hitting with a 2x4, I guarantee you that next officer is diving on them, and they're going to pull the baton out. That we are trained to work together as a group, literally locking arms. We do everything together. We do it systematically. It is not to injure anybody. It is to do the job and protect the facility, the people. And we end up, nobody ever says this, but I saw it. A lot of times in law enforcement, especially around the White House with the Secret Service, they end up rescuing more people that end up being victims of their own protest. They fall down. They shouldn't be there in the first place. And I don't mean from a criminal standpoint. They're a 65-year-old man that's 160 pounds overweight that wants to, raise up and hang out with the young people. And then the next thing you know, he's having an asthma attack. And one of my coworkers is dragging him by his boots out of the way so he can get some air and medicate himself. It happens all the time. If they even see it, they won't acknowledge it because they don't want to show the law enforcement, police doing good. We do a lot of good. We do it all the time. But when confronted with this, so back to your thing, yes, all those injuries are real. It's easy. You're handling people. They're throwing stuff at you. You're going to get cut up. They're covered, but things are going to go wrong. And then sometimes you literally, I was working a demonstration one time outside the fence line, and I missed the signal. It was a verbal signal for us to back up, and the park policeman in front of me stepped back on my foot and twisted his ankle. I mean,
Yeah.
I basically injured this guy because I didn't move fast enough. And I felt terrible, but he stepped to the side and went and got medical attention, and we kept moving forward. So it's always going to be anytime that somebody wants that kind of confrontation. And again, you have to look who's the puppet master, who wants this. They want this confrontation, and they're going to do everything they can to get it. And what I mean by that is you already know what I'm going to say. We've seen multiple interviews and sightings of all of a sudden, on 2 blocks away from the White House, there's a stack of pavers, stones, bricks,
exactly.
rocks, wooden sticks with metal dowels in them. So
people passing out Molotov cocktails.
Right. This is not to overstate, but this is very well orchestrated. It's like D-Day. They know where they're leaving from. They've got the equipment there. These guys are trained. The Secret Service is not going to let you breach the White House. They also do realize, I cannot overstate how well trained they are. Not perfect, but well trained. And they do realize that they're going to use actors that are kind of innocent and push them in front of them, and they're going to end up being victims. I saw it myself at the World Trade Organization in Seattle when I was in the Secret Service Uniform Division. They made a movie about it called The Battle of Seattle, and I saw it happen. I saw an innocent woman walk out of the TJF Fridays with all her coworkers' food stacked up and got ran over by the anarchists. And I don't know if she lived or not because I had to run back into the arena because they were about to breach the perimeter. So anyway, so tell me what I missed in the question.
I
talked
do
about
have
the
long
injuries.
questions, go
ahead.
So do you have any advice that they haven't done yet? And do you think the military should be deployed?
No, I don't think they should use the military yet. Let the Secret Service be the Secret Service. Now, if they ask for the augment, sometimes, the Secret Service already has an incredible relationship with the military. The military does all their communications. The special forces units help the Secret Service when they go overseas. If the Secret Service needs more medical response, they go, the Navy corpsmen. And if they don't have enough Navy corpsmen, they get medics from the special forces. They get the medics from the Rangers, from whoever is available. I worked a metal detector one time with a guy that was a chief master sergeant in EOD, Navy EOD, which is like unbelievable. I mean, so anyway, they had this relationship. If they need it, they'll ask for it. But the Secret Service wants to be the Secret Service, and they want to get the job done safely and correctly. They don't want to injure anybody, but these people want mayhem and pain. And be careful what you wish for. To my colleagues, they already know this. Take care of each other. You're already at the point, especially in the Secret Service. I mean, it can be a problem in any department, but the Secret Service is really good about their PT, working out, physical fitness. PT stands for physical training. It's an old military Army term. Anyway, these guys work out. They're strong. They have good endurance. They know how to protect themselves and the people that they're engaging, or they're engaging them. I say to my colleagues, Godspeed, go forward, be safe, take care of each other. And don't worry about the video. Do the right thing. You know what the right thing is. Don't hesitate. Protect yourself. Don't hesitate. Protect yourself. If it ends up on video, you'll get a chance to explain it. If it, because videos always look bad. Even if it's like I said, if I get a chance, I'll tell you about that video. So anyway.
So this is actually a perfect time to switch to that video we were going to talk about. You
Okay.
have it on your screen, and this attorney's reaction to the unrest at the White House a couple days ago. So you should hear it.
Last night, I saw something that I never thought I would ever see on American soil. It was the stuff of tin pot dictators in banana republics. As you probably know, throughout the entire country are protests against police brutality and systemic unfairness and racism. So of course, because this is 2020, the thing that was used to fight those protesting that unfairness and brutality was yet more unfairness and brutality. I never thought I would ever see anything like what happened last night in America. What I saw last night was a threat to our democracy, not foreign, but domestic. A violation of rights, of freedoms, and of laws by the very people who are supposed to protect and execute those laws. Lafayette Square is a place that I know very, very well. I worked downtown for years, and I would often go to Lafayette Park for a coffee or to have lunch outside. And it's a beautiful park right in front of the White House. It's also the site of many protests. There are actually protests there basically 365 days a year. There are people who literally camp out in tents. And given its proximity to the White House, it makes sense as one of the clear protest sites of choice. There have been protests there for decades, if not literally hundreds of years. And while President Trump was giving a speech about domination, he gave the order to clear out all of the protesters who were at and in front of Lafayette Park. President Trump's speech began shortly after 6 p.m.
So I don't know if you want to watch more of that, but what's your reaction to his characterization?
Okay. The first thing is, that may be his opinion, but what I just watched and listened to actually, it was a dramatization. He's using motion. He's almost on the verge of tears.
Right.
I know Lafayette Park just as well as he does. As a matter of fact, I've effected arrests in it. I've actually did a crime scene. Was part of a crime scene investigation in Lafayette Park when I worked there. Somebody tried to crash a vehicle through Lafayette Park into the White House fence. Anyway, so everything this guy said, part of this, what this guy said is true. It is a park that is demonstrated in 24/7. People live there all the time. They have demonstrations. The description that he used of what happened sounds like to me it was written by Joey Behar and George Soros. If you remove President if you remove President Trump from that thing and you insert Barack Obama, how would it change? He would say, "Oh, and the brave president walked across the street, and the protesters parted, and there was a little disturbance, but the Secret Service took care of it." That's what they would say. But because it's Trump, they want to draw it out. Listen, they gave those people plenty of warning. This is one thing he didn't say about those protests, and I haven't said it yet either. I'm going to say it to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
You and I have freedom of speech and freedom to protest, right? But in the District of Columbia, requires you to get a permit. You know that, right? You have to have
I
a
was
permit.
not aware, but yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, if you just walk up there, if you walk up in front of the White House with a sign that says, "I want free chocolate," you're
Right.
demonstrating because you want free Hershey's to give you free chocolate. And
show us the aliens.
What's that?
Show us the aliens.
No, exactly. No, and that's real. No, that's. I mean, I've seen that 100 times.
Of course. I've seen it. I think I saw it when I was there. Yeah.
And it's always entertaining. And so I'll tell you times I take advantage of them and say, "Hey, they're around the other side." But anyway, so they are. You have to have the permit. And let's say you're demonstrating about the aliens, and I go, "Hey, you're demonstrating right in front of one of the driveways. And I know that we're going to have a movement soon. We're going to bring a protectee out. Now, I'm not going to tell you that, but I'm going to tell you, hey, I need you to clear that driveway. You're going to say, I'm protesting. It's my right. I'm going to say, I agree. It is your right. Go back 10 feet. 10 feet, what difference does it make? No, no. I have the right to protest right here. That's not true.
Right, and civil disobedience involves literally breaking the law. I mean, people who
Right.
complain about even peaceful protesters who commit acts of civil disobedience, part of it is getting arrested. Al Sharpton knows it pretty well. He has he has a very smooth technique where he rolls up and gets the cuffs on, and you've probably seen a few videos of people like that.
I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been to 5 different arrests with him and Jesse Jackson. They have their own film crews.
Right.
They have their own. They know who the officers are. We already know who the officers are going to arrest them. They've never gotten a feather ruffled, a thread knocked off their suit. So this guy. My analogy is, this guy doesn't want to move to 10 feet. So, and he says, I say, do you have a permit? And he says, well, no, I don't need a permit. Well, no, you do. You do have a constitutional right to protest and freedom of speech, but the District of Columbia requires you to have a permit. So all I need you to do is go back 10 feet and this is over. Well, I'm not moving. Okay, so now I'm going to lock him up.
Correct.
I'm going to lock him up.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to say, okay, you're under arrest. And he says, no, and he runs. What am I going to do? I'm going to say, see ya. I'm not going to chase him. He didn't swing at me. Maybe my coworkers, the younger ones, might run him down, which is totally legitimate. But I'm getting what I want. I need the driveway clear. He runs. Okay, instead of running, he steps forward, takes a swing at me or spits at me. Now that's an assault. He gets locked up. As I'm locking him up, he kicks at me. So I back up. He's still kicking at me. He's handcuffed and he's kicking at me. I can't get around him. So now 3 of us have to get on top of him. So what does that look like? In other words, this guy's getting what he wanted. So when it comes to protesting, it's your constitutional right, but there's rules to it. So when Trump wanted to go across the street, there's protests. All they want him to do is move. This guy's describing it like Tiananmen Square, the Chinese running over students with tanks, which I watched. It's not. It's because they got these protesters that were out there in front of President Trump, a couple minutes in front of him, got what they wanted. They wanted to get on camera. They wanted Chris Cuomo and all these liberal, left-leaning sycophants to fawn over them, and that's what they got. No laws were broken. It wasn't even a stretch of the Constitution. Whether they had a permit wasn't the issue. They didn't ask. They might not even have said, do you have a permit? I just need you to disperse. I need you to go back 25 feet on either side of me, behind those officers. And then as soon as we're done doing what we're doing, I've done it many times. The first thing they say is, why? What is it you don't want me to see? You can watch whatever you want. Just do it back. And then we're going to do what we have to do. They secure the area. Those people got what they wanted, and the mainstream media, the press got what they wanted. They could bash President Trump. I'm telling you, if he walked out of there, handed them $500 a piece, they'd have accused him of something else, that the money was counterfeit. I mean, it's just, he can't win. And here's something else I want to point out, and it goes along with, real quick, I'm sorry. It goes along with kind of a message to law enforcement, and this is kind of a message to the leaders, not just the president, but the Secretary of Treasury or these senior people. Don't micromanage. If you want to walk across the street to St. John's Church, that's all you got to tell them. Don't ask them how they're going to do it. It's none of your business. They will do it correctly, safely, within the Constitution. They will protect you. Don't ask what's inside the dumpling. If you like the dumplings, eat them. So, you know what I mean? There's exceptions to that. Some people are just, they want to know that they care about what happens to the people that protect them. But, you want to go across the street, tell the Secret Service, they'll make it happen. That what you saw, they're making a big deal about. I saw other presidents do many times. Now, it wasn't because the church was burnt down, but there were demonstrations that we had to move. It's the same thing. They're making a mountain out of a molehill.
So I'm going to answer some questions in the chat. Just one question.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
The gentleman from the video he has a YouTube channel called Legal Eagle, and he does some. He was doing some very interesting analysis of like how the courts are different in movies than they are in real life
Yeah, it's not
as
even
an
close.
attorney, and
Right.
he like so his channel is kind of gone off the rails because he's blatantly, especially pertaining to the Flynn trial, he's
Right.
essentially been justifying like almost like extra like judicial prosecution and certain things that are obviously not within the Constitution. So I brought him up because he's one of these legal analysts that you can see they've completely convoluted the bounds of what legality and constitutionality mean in order to just fit their view of who Donald Trump is, which he's irredeemable in their minds.
Right.
Obviously we
Right.
can't say it. I mean, he's done some bad policies, Donald Trump, but like
Right.
you
Nobody's
explained,
perfect.
yeah, like you explained, some these protests, if they would have breached the White House barrier, I think it's included in either your book or Ronald Kessler's book. From to my knowledge, Donald Trump, there's some sort of tunnel in there. If needed, he could just escape through there. He doesn't need, and he has the bunker, and he has the
So,
Marine One helicopter. So,
right.
so these
So,
people would have been sacrificing their lives for to damage the White House itself.
right. So, yeah, the president can be secured in many ways, in a few ways, in different parts of the complex. And without, I can't go into too much depth, but there is no. Let me put it to you this way: there's no shortage of procedures or equipment to protect. And here's the thing: when the human beings start coming over the fence or the airspace is breached, they cross a threshold. Even throwing bricks over the fence and hitting the officers, you're crossing a threshold. You're raising the bar from standing there cussing at the Secret Service or the Park Police and calling their mothers' names and spitting on them, and even spitting on them kind of crosses the line. But when you
Right,
breach
legally.
that fence, right? When you breach that fence, you have raised the bar to a point where you can't come back. You can't put the toothpaste back in. You can't get unpregnant. You cannot come back over that fence and say my bad. You're going to
You can't
get
ungrill that hot dog.
right. And I had hot dogs for lunch. Thank you for bringing that up. So, but yeah, you cannot undo it, and you're going to trigger a series of procedures that are fast, efficient, violent, but violent in a way to meet that threshold. Not overly violent. Like you don't jump over you can't mine the grounds on the White House.
Right.
If they thought they could get away with it, they would. You don't jump over the fence and explode because you landed on a mine. You jump over the fence and you're going to meet a dog. You're going to meet a 175-pound uniform division officer, or maybe a 140-pound female uniform division officer coming at you at about 13 miles an hour, and they're going to tackle you like they're in the NFL.
Right.
And if you fight them, they're going to fight you like you're an Indian and they're John Wayne. And I know I just offended a lot of people and completely crushed political correctness, but
like a dog-faced pony soldier.
Right, exactly. So
yeah.
so they're giving you what you want. You want excitement and violence, they're going to give it to you. But once it's over, it's over. They're going to handcuff you. They're going to make sure you're not injured, as long as you don't fight them. And see, people are dumb. We get excited. We see these movies. You kind of brought movies up before. We see these movies where, all these professional actors fight like in unrealistic ways. And that's what I'm going to do. And, I'm going to take them by the head. You're not. You're not going to, you're going to get ripped apart. You are. And don't fight them. And don't cuss at them, and don't make it worse, because you're just going to raise every time you raise that level. And that level is what I mean is it's verbal, it's passive resistance, And then it's physical resistance. I'm telling you to move, you won't move. I'm moving, you're fighting me. And then you start throwing punches. And then, so all law enforcement is trained to meet that force with one level above. And so just to finish the use of force, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think the best, I have, to wrap up some of these previous topics, my advice to criminals, being that I am not one to anyone's knowledge, but is that if you're a criminal, the first thing you should do when you're doing a crime is to have a lawyer ready and an alibi, not to resist the police.
right.
The other advice I would give for people who are protesting is the woman who's gotten the best results from Donald Trump isn't even a politician. It's Kim Kardashian, a woman who made
Yes.
her name from
Her
ridiculous
backside.
fake marriages to NBA players who I don't know if Gary is a fan, but she got some people out of jail who
Yes.
it would have been very difficult to get them out of jail. And she got it done because her current husband, happens to
Yeah.
have some sort of affinity to Donald Trump. Next question. This
Go ahead.
will be a
Yeah.
fun one for you.
Absolutely.
Recently, Kathy Griffin has suggested that President Trump be assassinated by injecting him with air from a syringe to cause an embolism. Poisonings have been alleged as the causes of deaths of leaders like Yasser Arafat, Pope John Paul I, and Joseph Stalin. How challenging is it for the Secret Service and the White House staff to defend against this threat?
Okay.
Poisoning.
And I'm going to add President Zachary Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
So, which it turned out that's not what happened. They thought he was poisoned with arsenic. But anyway, so what you're talking about is what I described in my second book, Secrets of the Secret Service, is well, she started out as a soft endorsement of assassination, but she graduated very quickly, her and Madonna and a few, to outright assassination. So she's this, I don't know her. I can tell you I don't really think she's funny.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, to be completely honest, there were times years ago when I saw her in, I don't know if it was a show,
On Seinfeld,
TV,
probably. Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
where whatever she was doing, the dialogue that was written for her, she was funny. But
Mm-hmm.
listen, setting all that aside, she's a far left. She's unstable, and I'm not trying to insult her, but I'm telling you that the thing she did with the severed head, that is a threat. And if you think by suggesting injecting the president with an air bubble is different than trying to inject him with poison, you're wrong. You are trying to you are suggesting assassination. And yes, she will be interviewed if she hasn't been already. She probably has been before, because here's the thing: the Secret Service has learned a long time ago. Let's not forget John Wilkes Booth was an actor. I'm not impugning all actors, but also too, these people like Madonna, I would have taken Madonna's threat very seriously because she has a lot of money. She knows a lot of people. You can never take these things lightly. You can't. And so the service will go and do their job, just like they had to with. I used to work years ago with an old a Secret Service agent that was a polygrapher who was one of the guys that had to interview Jodie Foster after Hinckley shot Reagan. And, Foster was his fantasy. It was basically a scene out of that movie Taxi Driver. And so anyway, they interviewed Jodie Foster. And this guy said he was so impressed with her. And I mean, this is years ago. I'm not putting words in his mouth. I don't know what he thinks now. But he's like, here's somebody who was just, complete political opposites of President Reagan, but was literally losing sleep and weight because some crazy person took the scene out of a cult movie, a great movie, depending on if you liked it or not. I thought it was great fantasy, and used it to harm another human being. She was devastated. But she dealt with it very adult-like, and she was young at the time too. You got to remember.
She was in college. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they interviewed her. Anyway, this guy was very impressed with her. But so now we fast forward, and these Hollywood people are threatening them all the time. they're making jokes about it, and they think it's the soft endorsement of assassination, because somewhere out there there's a John Hinckley or a Jane Squeaky Fromm who tried to assassinate Reagan, or name 100 other mentally unstable or easily motivated people, and you keep putting these thoughts in their heads, and somebody's you're gonna trigger somebody. The Secret Service deals with it all the time. I don't want to take
poisoning specifically. Is it like how difficult is it to?
It's not. I mean, they have procedures to protect against it, but just a real quick. The first contact Monica Lewinsky had with Bill Clinton was during the shutdown. She tried to bring him pizza, and I tried to stop her. We didn't know where the pizza came from. They ordered it off the street from Domino's.
Right.
Nobody in the Secret Service or in the Navy steward had any idea where that pizza was and who touched it. But eventually, he did eat the pizza. But I fought. So my point is, I'm not trying to say.
Did he leave a tip?
No,
sorry, that was a joke.
It is. Yeah. Well, you're clearly much smarter than I am. You got to give me a minute. You got to give me a minute to catch up. Yeah, eventually he did. I understand. But kudos on that. That's a good joke. But so those people are out there, and yes, poisoning is a big deal, and not just poisoning, allergies. If somebody's allergic to something, that's poison. If you're triggered by if an anaphylactic shock, or the bad allergic reaction is triggered by peanut butter or whatever, and that and you do it, that's poisoning. So I don't know that the president has any of those issues. Based on what I've seen in media, I don't think he does.
I listened to an interview with Ronnie Jackson, who was maybe you knew him because I think he worked.
I remember him. Sure. Bush. Commander,
he's an admiral, I believe, in the Navy.
Yeah, he is now, right? Yeah,
and he explained it very in depth, like the challenges of maintaining the health care of
tough.
The president and I think a few other people in the White House.
Yeah.
Next question, a little bit of a side topic. You have been vocal online in support of firearms owners. You give a lot of advice on it. In the past several years, there have been a number of law enforcement persons from the International Associations of Police Chiefs of Police that support harder gun control positions, citing campus shootings and access by civilians to body armor that could inure them to police apprehension. What is your response to that as a former military and federal law enforcement officer?
Well, I think sometimes they're mistaken. We have all the gun control we need. We have all the gun laws. We have so many gun laws, we can't even enforce them. People have actually written books about the saturation of laws, not just gun laws, but
drug laws.
A typical human being, even me, a former police officer, 29 years, I understand firearms. Inadvertently, I probably, you can almost not go to or take a firearm to a gun range in some states and not break some laws. So I think they're wrong. I don't think we need any more laws. I think what we needed to, the idea of taking away firearms from you and me or from whoever wants them. First of all, we have to do away with this notion of why do I need an AR-15? It's not what I need. It's my right to have it. If you don't want to invoke that right, then don't buy an AR-15. Don't buy a 22 or buy a shotgun. So, but the idea, they do it a lot of times for political gain because the politician that manages them higher up in the chain of command, this is their mentality. And but it makes no sense to disarm anybody. It's you've seen there's 100 analogies out there that really bring it home. A wolf eats a sheep, so all the other sheep remove their teeth, so nobody has any teeth. You know what I mean? What
right.
Taking my firearms is not going to protect anybody else. What it does is it leaves me vulnerable and my family vulnerable, making me a soft target. Does not protect me. So I disagree with it. I respectfully disagree because a lot of these, I know law enforcement people that feel that way, and I'm polite to them, but they're wrong. you need these tools. It's a tool. That's all it is. It's a tool like a hammer. Again, I know you know all this, and
Right.
your
With the
your
audience.
audience is smart. Your audience knows this. But the Stanley hammer kills more people every year than a firearm. I mean, Hillary Clinton's bad decisions in Benghazi killed 4 people. My AR-15 hasn't harmed anybody. So here's the thing. Politicians realize that when law enforcement speaks, a guy stands up there, he's got 4 stars on his shoulder, he's the chief of a department somewhere, and he goes up and tells you that you're safer in your neighborhood if he knows how many guns you have or if he can come and take those guns. That's not true. It is not true. Because 24 hours later, when something happens, whether it's the crazy stuff we're seeing now or just that one time that's never going to happen to you, right? But it's happening 1,000 times a day all over this country, where that criminal comes to your house. And listen, I got nothing against a number 6 skillet, but it doesn't work as good as a shotgun. And it's not as intimidating. So these people, when they tell you that you're safer without them, the first thing I would tell you is think about 1938 in Germany.
Right, and there have been
They have to disarm you before they can control you.
there have been in the past year a number of there was the Breonna Taylor killing very, very recently in March, and I think his name is William Lem or something. This was a white guy, so this also
Right.
didn't make the headlines, but he was killed in his sleep. So I don't believe, I personally, I know you're law enforcement. I technically was law enforcement
Yeah.
a long time ago, but I don't think people can rely on the police. I know that the Parkland shooting, it was proven in court that those sheriff's deputies had no legal obligation to actually go and confront the suspect. They were acquitted of any liability for that. In fact, I think one of them was recently reinstated. And I think if people want to feel safer, they're not going to feel safer by a person not having a firearm if they themselves are dependent on limited resources of the police, and
Right.
they're not taking their own safety seriously and doing, if they're walking alone in the middle of the night or something, or they're like you were saying earlier with risk-taking behaviors.
Right.
So I think you're preaching to the choir here, obviously, maybe for
Yes.
slightly different reasons. So yeah, I certainly think that there's too many firearms laws, probably like a lot of the drug laws I personally don't support. Next question is, in May, of the prosecution against former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn fell apart, yet the case appears to drag on thanks to Judge Sullivan. Did you witness any shenanigans of this type to subvert the presidents you worked under, whether it was Clinton, Bush, the Bush Jr.? When, in your opinion, did the intelligence community begin to go down this path of naked political involvement, if you know?
Yeah. So I don't remember. I mean, there's always, every president is getting attacked. Again, you've heard me use this analogy before. The most popular, I'm going to name 2 very popular presidents, but 2 Democratic presidents, Clinton and Obama, and half the world wanted them dead and hated them. So you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So no matter who it is, half the country or the world or whatever don't like you and like to see it disappear. So they're always being attacked. What you're seeing is the systematic breakdown of what we're seeing now. These riots in the street. It started years ago. It started President Obama and his administration. Clearly, listen, when he looked at us right after he got elected and said, "A vote for me is a vote for systematic change," and it was like he was almost daring you to vote for him, and he wasn't kidding. He started out on the apology tour. He started, kind of apologizing for American greatness, started making people feel guilty. When somebody that's a smooth talker like him can make somebody self-conscious or about the greatness of the United States or the good things we've done. We're not perfect. We're not. I know how we got here. And I also know if it wasn't the United States and America, it would have been the Cheyenne Nation or the Cherokee Nation. They would have butchered all the other, you know what I mean? I know what reality is. I'm a big boy. I know how we got here. But what I'm saying is we have taken that and turned it into a very good, very caring, very generous country. So I believe, and you know, when people say the deep state, I rejected that at first. My co-writer and I, Grant Schmidt, used to argue about this a lot. It is the deep state. I'll say, just so we don't have to discuss it.
But he was of the opinion at the time that there was
well, he
state.
Well, he was going forward with the idea of the deep state. And
okay.
In my opinion, is it. I don't call it the deep state. They're career government employees that can't function outside the government. They're the people that spend 25 years in the Secret Service of the FBI. Then they go over and they work in the ATF under a different retirement. One of the things we could do to help our government is to have, you can work for the government, you work 25 years, you get out. The only caveat is that if you're in the military and then you go over to the civilian side, like you join the FBI, then you can have 2 retirements.
Reset the clock. Okay.
Right, reset the clock, get out. If you're not that great. You know, 2 of the most powerful positions in this country are elected positions. It's the speaker, the sergeant at arms to the House and the sergeant at arms of the Senate. They're both former Secret Service agents. And those guys, and they're good guys, don't get me wrong, I'm not impugning them. I know them both. I worked with them for many years. But the Secret Service purposely got them, helped get them in there because they look out for the Secret Service. And we can talk about that another time. But it started really breaking down with President Obama, and he started inserting these career employees. Brennan is one of them. I mean, how does a guy that belonged to the Communist Party get a job in the CIA?
Yeah, that's a $50 million question.
Based on his interviews, I'm not sure how he got the job to start with, but maybe there's something I don't know about him. You know, you always have to be careful. You don't know maybe the guy is a patriot and he's just went off the tracks, but that's not what I see. So many things are happening to do this. You have career government, you have Pelosi and all these people that have been in there for 30, 40 years. And every 4 to 6 years, every time they're getting reelected, they convince a certain amount of people that if you don't keep them in office, that all these evil things that they've told you are going to happen. You're not going to be able to have abortions anymore. Mm. You're not going to be able to have your guns anymore. It goes both ways. And but they never leave office. And at some point, John McCain was one. All of them, and they're not just Democrats, Republicans too. They get to the point where they have to stay in office because they've been there for so long that they have done shady things. Don't forget. I can't remember her name, but it was a male. He was an African American member of Congress about 12 years ago. The FBI executed a search warrant on his house. No notice. Nobody ever heard about the investigation, but they found $80,000 stuffed in plastic bags in the freezer.
I think his name was like Jefferson or something from Louisiana.
Oh yeah, that sounds. Yeah,
I forgot his.
Yeah, so you know what I'm saying? So term limits on how long employees can stay in the government. If you're so great, get out and do it for a company in the private sector. Nobody is irreplaceable. Stop looking at, I used to see these Secret Service agents that they get hired by other government agencies or even civilian agencies. And they're like, I don't know what we would do without them. I'm like, you'd probably save a fortune. And don't get me wrong, I'm not bashing all Secret Service agents, but as you know, the Secret Service has a management issue.
Mm-hmm. And you went into very in-depth detail.
And they may have corrected some of it, but so anyway.
That's in Secrets of the Secret Service. You were talking a lot about the sort of the things people can get away with, and then a lot of, I think, like the relationship between Bill Clinton and what was he had like an Italian last name, like
Marletti.
Marletti, yes.
Yeah, Lou Marletti.
That was very interesting stuff.
Yeah. And so this exists. They're infiltrated our government. They want this They want this totalitarian state. Now, here's the thing. Do I literally, okay, 20 years ago, I would tell you, I don't literally think they're going to overthrow the government. Now I'm telling you I was wrong, and they're doing it in front of us. They are overthrowing the government. If a judge is telling you that Michael Flynn did nothing wrong, but I'm going to give you some advice to how to keep him in jail, that's tyranny. That's
Right.
if a judge who lives in Hawaii is using his personal political opinion to force the president of the United States to take something he wants to do all the way to the Supreme Court, so the Supreme Court can show that the Ninth District is corrupt, that's wrong. That's against our Constitution.
And with the revelations from, what was it, last month, of the actual transcripts of the congressional closed door hearings, there's a lot of these people who they started, like, this is what worries me a little bit more than just what you said was, of course, certainly to the point, but a lot of these people started getting gigs on TV, including Brennan and James Clapper. And what they were saying behind closed doors was completely 180 degrees opposite of what they were saying on TV, such as Evelyn Farkas, who was on TV talking about how she and her colleagues had gathered a lot of this evidence and they were going to preserve it in order to illustrate the plot. And then behind committee doors, she admitted, well, no, we don't have any evidence of collusion with the Russian government.
I remember.
So yeah, that's certainly worrying. So there's two written questions left, and then there's the lightning question that we discussed before.
Before you ask me those two questions, can I just expand on what you said?
Yeah, sure.
So this is where the mainstream media and the Democratic Party, this is where you can see them acting together. So people like Brennan or whatever, and these other people you named, they know what the truth is, but they get this very lucrative gig. Now, whether CNN or MSNBC hires them for a certain price and then says, well, what are you going to say? And they say, well, I'm going to say this, that, and that. And they go, okay. Or they give them a dialogue, a script, and say, would you be okay doing this? This is what we're going to pay you. The outcome is the same. It doesn't matter really what happened. It doesn't matter if they decided to lie to protect President Obama and these other people. The outcome is the same. It's the same as if CNN said, we're going to give you $500,000 a year to read this script. And they said, yeah, no problem. And they went to a lawyer and just made sure that, I can say this. And then you can say, well, at the time, that's the information I was getting. But who's going to prove you wrong? Which is exactly what Brennan said. At the time, that's the information I was getting. They're lying, they're corrupt, and they're pushing this forward. They're pushing this forward. They're trying to make President Trump look illegitimate and crush our constitutional democracy, or constitutional republic.
Yesterday, I was watching the whole hearing of Rosenstein, and the entire time he's like, yeah, all of these mistakes were made, and yet, I mean, what do you want from me? I'm just giving suggestions. Right. And they were asking him, well, if you were supposed to be there and approve all of this, and you're blaming all the people who brought this to your desk and then you signed onto it without reading it, shouldn't you have some sort of culpability for it? He's like, oh, this is me being culpable right here, talking to you. I was like, what are you talking about, man?
Right.
So the next two questions are not necessarily related to that.
Sure.
A new documentary has been released by Netflix concerning the activities of billionaire sex trafficker and predator Jeffrey Epstein. The 4-part series mentions in parting President Clinton and gives some attention to Epstein's past friendship with Trump. Sorry, I think there's somebody at my door, which is conspicuous given that we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein. I'll be back. Just a second.
Okay.
I'm still alive, and I didn't kill
Good.
myself. And
Good. I was just thinking, how could
yeah,
I get the police to come? I don't know where you live exactly. So,
exactly.
yeah, I've been watching the horror story on the video. All right, so go ahead.
So, okay, so the four-part series mentions in parting President Clinton and gives some attention to Epstein's past friendship with Trump. In your experience, were there sexual predators working within the White House that, apart from the ones we know about itself, that you and the Secret Service were concerned about?
Yeah. So, clearly, besides President Clinton, yeah, sort of, you can kind of call um, Monica Lewinsky. Her predator behavior. It wasn't just about sex; it was also about ladder climbing, and then later on became about emotion and sex.
Mm-hmm. And
She
desk
was
climbing.
definitely, yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
yes,
Sorry.
yes. You're on fire today, buddy.
Hey, man, I mean, I have to
Yes.
control myself elsewhere. Go ahead.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
I agree. So she was a predator, a type of predator. Yeah, I saw that type of behavior in people. As long as they weren't doing anything overt. Like she was, circumventing the security, and we see a lot of that. They're not all predators, but there's some people that I would say in hindsight turned out to be some very odd behavior later on.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody I don't know of any cases where the Secret Service was notified by another agency and said, hey, this guy works at the White House, and we found 14 dead dogs at a house he used to live at.
Wait,
And
this did happen?
no, I'm just saying,
For
nothing like,
example, okay.
yeah, nothing like that. But yeah, you saw, Bill Clinton's behavior. I would say Mrs. Clinton was like an anger predator. She was like a steamroller. She was, I've described her as a dictator. She was a completely out of the norm. She, the only example I really need to mention is, she is, Mrs. Clinton, she's so smart and she's a policy wonk. After all those years in the government, she doesn't understand how the classification system works, and she can't secure emails. So that tells you, but she kept pushing herself forward all the time. Is this, but no, nothing too dark. I will tell you a quick, again, this is something nobody, yeah. So when I was working at the White House in the early 90s, I think Bill Clinton had just become president. And I honestly believe, no kidding, I don't think it had anything to do with the Clinton administration. But one day, West Executive Avenue runs, north and south, and it's on the west side. And at the top of it, the exit gate is called Alpha 4, and at the bottom, it's Baker 4. And outside the Baker 4 gate one night, like 9 o'clock at night, a UD officer was doing his patrols, and he saw this. Back then, you could still park. The road was still open, and you could still park. And there was this car parked there, and it's something caught his eye. And he walked over, and he looked at it, and there was a person in there, and he thumped on the window, and they didn't move. They didn't startle, so he opened the door, and the person fell out, and they had 2 bullet holes in their head. And so he called it in, and Metropolitan showed up, and a tow truck showed up, and they just took the car away, and it went away. And but I don't really think it had anything. I think it was a murder at the White House. And when I say at the White House, it was on the White House, what's considered the grounds now, but then it was still a public road, for pedestrians and cars. Like I said, it was partially a parking lot, and it just went away, and we never heard another thing about it. So, and when my coworkers did the report, they never got they just said, okay, thanks, goodbye, go back to work. So those are one of the kind of the funny things that happened, odd things, So anyway, because of course they squashed it because, my take on it was they squashed it because, not because it would embarrass them, because it would embarrass them, and it had nothing to do with them. Like, oh, this person was found dead. And that's just my take on it. I don't really know what all the facts were other than that person was found there. So anyway.
So then the next question, slightly related. In a recent interview with The Last Outlaws, you mentioned Vice President Joe Biden's reputation for physically groping women.
Yeah.
This was also documented by author Ronald Kessler in his book, The First Family Detail, in which he revealed that Biden would skinny dip at his Delaware residence in front of female agents. In Congress, which is guarded by the Capitol Police, not the Secret Service, officials like John Conyers and Ted Kennedy apparently got away with sexual assaults for decades.
Yes.
Not always at the Capitol, but in some cases, yes. Secretary of State Clinton, of whom you have many fond memories, is reported to have known that her spiritual advisor, Byrne Strider, was a serial sexual harasser and didn't fire him and actually covered it up. You witnessed similar issues as one of President Clinton's security officers. Do you think that in order to curb these abuses, protective officers should have a legal mechanism by which to report sex crimes by an official that they are securing?
I do. The problem is it's never going to be used the way you and I are discussing it, and common sense would tell you it's intended. It's because an officer will very unlikely throw himself on the sword. I mean, don't get me wrong. You remember who Kathleen Willey is?
Yeah, I have her book here. Yeah.
Right. President Clinton assaulted her. Listen, if I heard her yell out and I went in there, I would have separated them. You would have seen the fear in her face, and I would have pulled her out of the room, walked her out of the room. And I probably would have got fired for it, or at least transferred, but I would have done the right thing just because of the circumstances. And I believe some of the other people would have too. Most everybody would. But I don't see guys doing that. Yes. And I see it being something that it could go awry. But if it's the law, it's the law. Like if it's a tool they could use, like the whistleblower thing, which is one of the reasons I'm apprehensive, because that's a train wreck. And the Ombudsman program, which in the Secret Service is just a pipeline right to the director's office. So your intentions
it's like a self-snitching.
Yeah, it is. It's yeah. You're giving your own self stitches. Snitches get stitches, right? So I think your intentions are 100% spot on. I'd say we're looking at it from the wrong perspective. What we need to do is screen these bizarre bastards first. And when I say bastards, that's the wrong term, people, because there's women out there that might not be sexually abusing or harassing their employees, but they're abusive. Like Hillary, there's other ones. The way these people behave, if you walked into, the analogy I use, if you walked into the veterinarian that takes care of your dog and you saw him treating his employees like this, you take your dog somewhere else. And one of those other names that you mentioned was Ted Kennedy. Had a horrendous reputation. I mean, he literally, and I have every reason to believe it's true. He literally raped a waitress in a restaurant.
The Italian restaurant, I read that story with Chris Dodd.
Yeah, right. And they sat around and, anyway. So there's always alcohol involved. Sometimes there's drugs involved. They're like children because they're never held accountable. They never held accountable. They're probably people that, like the Kennedy family, is notorious for Joe, the old grandfather, telling them, you're a Kennedy. You don't stand in lines. You don't stop for the police. You're a Kennedy. You get whatever you want. If you don't, you come to me, and that's how they are. And I've seen it, I've seen it in the Secret Service. I even literally saw it as an air marshal in a bizarre way. But anyway.
So some of like actually Katie Hill recently, she was a female politician who, I think she was just dumb. She exposed herself, literally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that.
But there was, Vice President Gore had that weird masseuse story. Do you think some of these people, like, they do this, but they're like, he's probably more careful? I think Gore.
He's not careful. He's not careful. He's just kind of lucky. Okay. Once he left office, and I was in the air marshals, and I was on a long flight, and a Delta Airlines employee, a flight attendant, we started talking about politics. She found out I was in the Secret Service. She started telling me her Al Gore story, where Al Gore was eating a ham sandwich and mustard spilled on his pants, on his zipper. And he got up, walked up to her, grabbed her hand, and said, "Hey, wipe this off," and started rubbing her hand on his genitals. And I had no reason not to believe her. When she told me the story, and she was like, "These people are nuts." And I'm like,
It's a
"Yeah,
climate
they are.
change mitigation technique.
Yeah, right, exactly. So they all, they don't just become that way. It's that when they get into Congress, they realize that they're almost immune from prosecution. And in some cases they were. The original sexual harassment and labor work rules that were voted on in this country from the, almost from the very beginning, a lot of them Congress exempted themselves. Did you know that? They
Yeah,
exempted
that's it's
themselves.
been brought up.
Yeah.
Concerning Conyers especially.
Right.
Yeah.
And the first time I heard of it was a woman that had this very legitimate complaint against Kennedy. And when she got a lawyer, and when it finally got to the point, and they're like, "Yeah, you have to drop this because he's exempt himself." And then that started getting out, and then they changed it. And so, but that's they're all little emperors. That's what they are.
Yeah,
and they all.
I just think, like, personally, whenever, like, I'm among friends, I'll say, like, I do, like, a lot of, like, ridiculous, like, metaphors, and I don't have any, like, I'm a freedom of speech absolutist. I think in a professional setting, though, whenever I've been at work, it's the opposite. You can't behave the way you do with your buddies and your, your cousin, whoever.
Sure.
So I think, like, the stories that you're talking about, it just shows that they do believe that there's two different Americas. There's an America that they want to impose on us, which would restrict all of that. Like you were saying, certain things you said today would be, offensive speech, things like the Indian analogy. Whereas this is like, there's many things. I think it might have been in your book, but it might have been in Kessler's book, that Gore told his son, Gore the Third, Al Gore the Third, that if he didn't study harder, he would end up being like a loser and end up being like one of the Secret Service guards. It's like, come on, dude.
Al Jr. Yeah.
Did you have like any, like, what was your personal experience with Gore? Was he like a weird person? Like
he was. Unfortunately, I come down on both sides. He was weird. He was kind of odd. He was a little paranoid when it came to like him being surveilled, which tells you the kind of life he's probably really living. But on a different note, he did kind of a really good thing one time. The Uniform Division I Christmas lost a UD officer. Christmas morning, we worked out Morris Altice. We worked at the training center together. We relieved them at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to get them home early because they had little kids. And 15 minutes later, Morris was dead. He fell asleep at the wheel, didn't have a seatbelt on, Baltimore Washington Parkway. So it turned out, before Morris worked at the training center, he spent 6 years at the vice president's residence when the Gores were there. And he had a very, very good relationship. I mean, professional, but good relationship with the Gore daughters. And it started out because the Gore daughters were a little hard to secure, and they were young women, and Al Jr. at times, and they would circumvent their security, and the Secret Service is used to this. But one day, he was having a conversation with one of the Gore daughters, and he said, "Hey, that agent, whatever." And she goes, yeah, blah, blah, blah. We ditched him and blah, blah. She goes, they're going to take him off the detail. And she's like, why? He's a nice guy. Because he's not doing his job. Because you ditched him. And he's got a family. He's got a wife. And you just changed their life. And he was telling them, like, he wasn't trying to make them feel bad, but he was showing these young people, and he was pretty young himself, but he understood, he was understood what the ramifications were of behavior, and he made them understand. I mean, to the point where they changed their behavior, all of them, so fast, so much, and it became so easy to protect them that they, in some cases, they probably saved their parents from some embarrassment, and in a couple of cases, they probably saved themselves some possible harm. And the Secret Service acknowledged it, and they didn't acknowledge it correctly, of course, but because he was trying to become an agent at the time he had this accident. He was in the uniform division, and some of us that are bitter about his death feel like that if they had made him an agent a couple of years before when he first requested it, that it never would have happened. But you don't know that. But he was a good guy, and it hurt. But that's also who Al Gore was. And the point I'm getting to, when this guy passed away, his daughters went to the funeral, and they were so emotional that they could. Morris's wife was consoling them, and it wasn't fake. It was real. It was heart crushing, and Al Gore sent a letter to be read at the viewing at the funeral. And I'm telling you, it wasn't written by a speechwriter. It was written by somebody at one time, somewhere, had a heart. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't that dork. It was very nice, and so I kind of come down on both sides. But from the political side, he never did a thing I agreed with. He was crass in private. He was a kind of a frat boy, which I'm fine with. But I get everybody's
his
a little.
Father was a senator too.
He was, and just one more thing about
senator, so people don't forget.
Right,
Yeah,
and Gore became this big environmental savior. The Gore family farm in Tennessee had one of the largest dump sites on it. All farmers have places on their property where they dump shit, and the Gores were no different. He's up there talking about, he wants you and I to drive electric golf carts. Well, there was no Tesla back then, and there was no Rivian, and GM wasn't making big electric cars. So they wanted us to basically drive around in golf carts, and he's got thousands of pounds of old farm equipment and materials rotting and leaching into the soil on his property. So anyway.
Right. So that's it for all of the regular questions. There was the question that, I think it was a few months ago, you interviewed with a person who has a bad history with me, but I was very surprised he did not raise the subject of 9/11, since he has a very long history of saying things about 9/11. Now, you were personally impacted both as a Secret Service officer and later as an air marshal by 9/11. Did President Bush conceal from the public, in order to preserve relationships of his with foreign governments, Saudi Arabia, Israel, whoever, certain details about what he knew and what happened on 9/11?
No, I don't believe so. But here's what I will tell you. Correct. And just to reiterate, I hate to sound like I'm always hawking my book, but I talk about this in Secrets of the Secret Service. The outcome is the same. It's incompetence, and it's a giant government that one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing. In the Secret Service, we started hearing Osama bin Laden's name in 1993. Shortly after that, he threatened the United States, made that threat that he was going to attack us. We ignored it. Parts of the government laughed at him. Who is this, crazy Arab living in a cave that's going to attack the United States? There were people inside the intelligence community who understood what he was saying and understood his motivation. And eventually, do we make a lot of mistakes? We absolutely did. Was there a lot of chatter and stuff that was ignored before 9/11? There was. I know this personally because 2 weeks before it happened, 14 Secret Service employees, firearms instructors, went to a course in Phoenix, Arizona. The Secret Service Uniform Division has this great rapport with airlines. We get them to hold planes up for us all the time, legitimately, and when we're late because we're hungover coming back from somewhere. But anyway, so this flight attendant I wasn't on the trip, but I was when they got back, they started training me on the skills. I was a new instructor. And so they said 2 weeks before that they would not open that door. And she said, I can't explain this to you, but from somewhere in the government, from some agency, we've gotten a warning that people might try to force their way down the jetway. That was 2 weeks before. and they didn't think anything about it. And then 2 weeks later, on that beautiful morning, did we make some mistakes? Yes, but most of it was incompetency. Some of it's arrogance, but it ends up being the outcome is the same. We ignored the signs. The FBI chain of command ignored the memo from that woman. Arab men learning to fly planes. They're not learning to take off. They're not learning to land.
Oh,
This
the
is
woman
odd.
from Minnesota, I think you're talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
This is odd. And because some agent in her chain of command that didn't like her, she's a woman, or whatever reason. It didn't matter. Maybe she stood him up for a date or said she wouldn't go out with him. Maybe he just doesn't, maybe he was having a bad day. But that memo was still on his desk when the World Trade Centers were falling. So a lot of mistakes made. And I want to tell you, we learned from our mistakes, and we did in some cases, but we didn't, in 2015, the Congress hired an outside group of people to survey the Secret Service, and they found suggestions that were suggested during the end of the Kennedy assassination investigation, that they never implemented. But they're doing them now because they were good ideals. So it's just out there. There's incompetence, there's arrogance, and when all that lines up and Murphy's Law falls into place, shit like that happens. Now, do I think there might have been some conspiring at lower levels? I do, but not to cause 9/11, but to ignore the signs. What do they know? Or but some people saw it coming, and they were ignored. So, or saw a possibility. So anyway,
So
I don't believe in what he. But then again, I'm fine with listening to him.
right.
And
Yeah.
anyway,
and yeah, I think it's I'm also if he wasn't on, if his material wasn't available, I wouldn't be able to read it and or listen to it and sort of look through the facts too. So yeah, I think it's always good to interview with different people. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that I think certainly there has to be, look at all the stuff that's happening now, and in terms of what the intelligence community is getting away with. James Clapper was in the intelligence community during 9/11. There were a lot of people who were never, never filtered out after a year. This was a massive failure if you think about it.
yes.
Being able to hit the Pentagon and the World Trade Center 3 times, and then another plane that, due to no government intervention, crashed in Pennsylvania, which is a little closer to where you live. But what I do believe that the big failure of the Bush administration was, apart from the Iraq War, which I think was a massive mistake and that they are culpable for, it was this very rushed and superficial 9/11 report, and I would say that we do need a full inquiry into it.
The government doesn't want it. Just like they did the same thing they did with the Kennedy assassination. There's things they don't want you to know because mistakes were made, and they don't want to embarrass themselves. Go ahead, and then if you want, I'll tell you that thing that's not in there.
Yeah, so I will. So I think that in terms of all the topics we cover today, so we're talking a lot about just the government, preserving in its own ranks a lot of people that are mediocre, and that they make it harder for the people who actually want to do the work. And then at the same time, you do see a reason why people like, Lennon McCarthy, who's in the chat, said Bob Mueller is an example. There's people who can be, bad leaders who can get promoted. And there's a lot of very...
all the time.
Yeah. So Gary was, you were not Secret Service brass. You were actually working with the people on the ground and in the Oval Office. So this is why I think it's valuable to talk to people. Obviously, it would be great to have people on the brass who would come forward. I understand from your books that it's not likely to happen. I was going to ask you if you think there will ever be a point where there would be like a Secret Service alumni I guess, association that would talk about these problems that are within the
Well,
service.
there is an association, and that's one of the first groups that came out and attacked me when I wrote the first book and called me a liar. Now they didn't attack me on the second book because I had filed a suit, and they realized they were liable and they could get their rear end sued. But anyway, so no, they're never going to do that unless that somebody pays them to do it. You're never going to see the freedom action like I did. And I'm not blowing smoke up my own backside. I'm not. But I decided to tell my side of the story as it related to the Clintons and what happened. And I'm glad I did. It was very cathartic for me. Um, um, and so life goes on. No, they're not going to, because they don't want to be held accountable. You know, the reason, again, 9/11, a lot of it happened because of incompetency and arrogance. The same with John Kennedy's assassination. He's dead because the Secret Service was incompetent. Set aside all the conspiracy crap. Set it aside. They left a window big enough for a guy to stick a shit rifle out of and shoot at him. Now, there's other mitigating circumstances. Again, some of them go back, some of these theories go back to the Secret Service's incompetence and poor training at the time. I mean, it's, just to give you an example that's easy to prove. After the first shot, the driver stepped on the brake 3 times and slowed the car down even more. I'm like, come on, Jesus Christ. My son was 9 years old. He understood, to smash the accelerator on the go-kart, So anyway,
Yeah, you had 2 stories. There's one comment in the chat talking about 3 buildings at free fall speeds from just aluminum airplanes beyond incompetence. I don't know Gary's stance on the controlled demolition, but I think, for the record, every theory, even the ones that I've refuted, I think they should be addressed by a 9/11 commission. I don't think that they're all true. I think that I've read through that study, and it is interesting, and I think it should be considered. It doesn't mean that necessary. I mean, there are other ways people can model, because I'm a mechanical engineer. There's ways you can model, and talk about flaws in modeling of stress vectors. But yeah, you can say whatever you want, and you can go ahead with the stories you wanted to tell earlier, Gary.
Sure. So about 9/11, I believe it happened like it happened, and you being an engineer, here's what really struck home to me. So after the planes hit, and I'm watching it on TV, and they had some of the engineers that did the original designs, and these people were literally walking you through what was happening at the time. And I realized the planes were aluminum, but they were aluminum with a lot of fuel, and that aluminum that crashed into that mortar or stone or whatever you want to call it, exterior, and into those steel girders, was going over 500 miles an hour, and it weighed a lot. It's ballistics. We're talking about ballistics, right?
Correct.
And I realized the projectile, the plane, shredded itself, but that fuel, it was momentum, right? The fuel didn't just stop; it kept going, and as it was going, what was it doing? It was vaporizing, and it was catching fire, and it started from one end and went to the other, and anything that could burn easily caught fire, and that fuel laid in those beams, and it got that stuff so hot that it eventually started to sag. And these guys were describing as it was happening. And because I had been to the World Trade Centers years before when I was a younger guy, and I'd been up to that, and I would tell you, when I went up there and looked from the observation tower, I discovered I had vertigo. So anyway, and so I believe it did happen. I understand the confusion. Here's something I do want to say. I understand the confusion about Building 7, because I'm going to tell you something. I had been in Building 7 at least 12 to 15 times. Do you know I did not understand it was not part of the tower? I didn't know it was its own standalone building, because you can't see it when you're in it. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't work there all the time. When I was up there on details, I'd go in and get equipment. I would bring cars back there, which was always a nightmare. But I had been in there. I didn't understand it was a separate building. So I understand, and I understand the stresses, and it's hard for people to understand that. When I say I understand, it's not that I'm an engineer, but what they're saying to me is not alien. I understand ballistics.
Mm-hmm.
I get that. I know that done correctly, I can shoot a glass tube through a piece of aluminum. You know what I mean? So
Right. So yeah, in physics, I mean, when even objects that might be, they might not necessarily be dense. For example, there's always they talk about with hurricanes that a sheet of paper can potentially slice your head off
right.
because of the aerodynamics and the momentum within it. So it's I personally, I don't want to get too far into the
Say
weeds
whatever you
too.
want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
yeah.
think that what would have to happen would be a full, just like they're doing the stupid Flynn trial. They're saying, oh, everybody submit your paperwork, which makes no sense in that case. I think with the 9/11
Agreed.
thing, you could have people submit their stuff and then it would be scrutinized. I don't think there's any reason. I mean, maybe there would be costs involved, but I think that people should, and this was the University of Alaska at Fairbanks that created the latest study, which was fairly well grounded concerning Building 7. So I think that there's no, if there's all this, they just declared racism a public health crisis in Ohio.
Yeah.
That people waste time on other stuff. I think that it's time we spent time on this.
So just to help you out a little bit with this. So I'll use the Judge Kavanaugh analogy. If we can spend all that time and money on skewering that very nice guy who I had met a couple of times, and I know who the real Judge Kavanaugh is, a decent guy. If they can spend all that time impugning that guy and ruining his life before they put him on the Supreme Court, they can spend time on, and they should have. But the reason they didn't is because they're trying to avoid some of the mistakes that were made with the Kennedy assassination, where they withheld information. So, but they did steer it. And one of the things that didn't get in there was, so in the early 1990s, I start working there in 1991. So about 1993, the winter of 1993, I'm still working I'm working in the West Wing sometimes. No, I'm sorry, I'm permanent in the West Wing, but I'm working the outside on days off and overtime. Anyway, I'm working, and we're new enough. When I say we, my class, where we're still a lot of us are working together. So there's like probably 15 of us working this night, and this is what happened. We were, it was a dark, cool, Washington night. It was depressing and dreary, and and all of a sudden, no, I'm sorry, I was working in the West Wing when it happened. All of a sudden, they went over the radio. The control center call sign at the time was bandbox. Bandbox to all officers, prepare to copy. And that's a signal to tell you to get something out and write down. So I thought I was probably copying down a description of a vehicle, somebody coming to the White House, to tell the president the secret to yogurt or whatever. Anyway, so what they did was they gave us a description of an incident that had happened approximately 2 hours before, where an African-American male living in Washington, D.C., who drove a taxi, picked up a man of Arab descent from Dulles Airport. He said he had just arrived from the Middle East. He was very fit looking. He described him as there was actually a partial sketch done later on. He drove this guy from Dulles to the White House. At that time, you could still go down Pennsylvania Avenue. And so they went around one time. He had him drop him off, I think, on 15th Street. He asked him to wait. He walked around to the White House. He made some sketches on a piece of paper with a pencil. He walked around the whole thing. They drove around it. He got back in the car. He drove him back to Dulles, and he got back on a plane, as far as the driver knows. And later on, so we recorded it, we wrote it down, and they said, we have nothing. And they actually said over the radio, we have nothing to act on. We're telling you this. Agents from ID are on their way to Dulles. They're looking at video. It was very suspicious. And then now fast forward to 9/11. Who did I just describe to you?
Was it Mohammed Atta? Maybe?
That's who I believe it is. That's who and not a lot of people remembered it. A couple days later, after 9/11, when we're still reeling, we're still raw emotion, man. You're either, back then, and I don't mean just people in the Secret Service. I mean the whole country. You're either laughing, crying, or yelling. You want to just, the next day when Congress stood on the steps of the Congress and sung God Bless America, I wanted to go down there with a baseball bat. I was furious. I blame them. They let this happen. We're worried about making sure everybody could get an abortion, and we're worried about who Gary Condit was boinking and what happened to his intern, and we let this shit happen. And I was personally angry like a lot of people. So a couple of days went by, and I was sitting around one day, and I was talking to one of my classmates, and then that popped in my head. So I didn't say anything right away. I went down to my office in the indoor range, and I wrote down what I remembered. I'm literally a terrible writer, bad speller. I know I wrote 2 books. That's why I had a co-writer. But anyway, so I made notes and everything, and then I didn't call the guy that I was sitting with, Dave. I called somebody else, and I said, "Hey, do you remember back when we first came on?" And I explained the story. And he goes, "Oh yeah, I remember that." And I said, "Well, think about it. Who do you think that could have been?" He goes, "Well, I don't know." I'm like, dude, a Middle Eastern man lands at Dulles. He comes to the White House. The taxi driver describes him as very athletic. Somewhere there was a sketch of what he thought he looked like. He goes, "Yeah, I remember that." And he goes, "You're not implying that it could have been one of these guys." I said, "I'm telling you, I think it was Muhammad Atta." So I went to a couple other people.
Yeah, from your description, Muhammad Atta was an architect, went to Germany, learned architecture. The second person, you said this was 1991. The second person who would come to mind to me was the mastermind of
early 90s.
Okay, but it was under President Bush.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
So the second person I would suspect, given the description, but this could be someone we don't like, who is not known to the but let me. So Ramzi Youssef is the person who masterminded the first World Trade Center bombing.
Right.
Excuse me. And he was also a very he put together the Ryder truck bomb. He did all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of false identities, and I believe his name was a Palestinian raised in Kuwait, so people aren't entirely sure if that's his real name.
Right.
So, yeah, certainly this could have been someone who went later and committed one of these. There's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Excuse me.
So
yeah, go ahead.
Right. No. So just to finish up the story. So I sit down and I start doing a memo. Now, at this time I'm out at the training center. So I go to my sergeant at the training center, and I have like the first draft of the memo. He looks at it. He's like, "Okay, I'm not going to tell you not to do it." So I went back and did another draft. In the meantime, it was getting around to my old classmates and stuff, and they're like, "Yeah, I remember that. I said, "Well, here's what I've written," and so anyway, a couple of days later, somebody from the ID duty desk called us and said, "Hey, I hear you got a story to tell us." And I said, "I do," and they said, "Okay, tell us." I told them over the phone, and I said, "All right." So he listened to it and everything, and then somebody else who it turned out one of my classmates was actually on the fence line that night and believes he saw this guy and the taxi, because I didn't know this at the time, but like he reported that night when it happened over the radio, he picked up the phone and said, "Hey, I think they were right in front of me." So the FBI honed in on this guy. They took his interview and his statement and everything, and nothing ever happened to it. Whether it fell to the wayside because of incompetence or somebody selectively removed it, who knows? But the outcome is the same. That's the kind of my recurring theme. Whether it's done intentionally or done with incompetence, when the outcome is the same, it's not that it doesn't matter. It's that you got to put the conspiracy theories to the side and find out, what's wrong with our system that this didn't get reported. So because when the 9/11 report came out, I actually was flying as an air marshal. I read it on the plane, And I'm going to tell you, everybody that sat next to me saw me reading it like they couldn't even look me in the eye. It was so raw and emotional still. I mean, and it was tough to read. It was, and I looked for it and it wasn't there. So anyway, that's just something.
Did you feel like it was a poor body of work too, or did you, like in general?
Oh well, listen. How could it not be? It's done by the federal government, and government elected congressmen and senators, and people from the White House at the time decided what was pertinent. It's the same with the investigation of the Kennedy assassination. We'll tell you what you need to know. Now, I'm not saying they do it all the time with everything, but the outcome is still the same. They're withholding information. They're never going to know, and that's why there's never going to be it. If somebody literally knew inside the intelligence, which that one guy that worked for the Clintons and then worked for the Bushes came out, and he was, I mean, when he first did it, I was really pissed off, and I thought, who the hell are you? But he was going around literally apologizing. And then later on, when my rough exterior cracked a little bit and I saw things a little bit differently, I'm like, I get where he's coming from. I'm not saying I agree with him. I don't disagree with what he did. I get where he's coming from. He knew certain things, and they did everything they could to get it to the forefront, and other parts of the government ignored it. So anyway, that's where I am.
So we've reached, like, there's all questions are answered. You had 2 anecdotes you wanted to share that we missed earlier.
Yeah. So let me think what they were. Oh, yeah. Okay. So we're talking about arrests, police brutality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one day I come into work at the White House. It's mid-'90s. We come in. The off-going shift was asked to stay. The ongoing shift was there. And this officer, a buddy of mine, I can't remember his name right now. He wasn't out of my class. Excuse me. Great guy. Nice, funny, good cop. He's standing there, and the lieutenant or captain at the time, Bill Healy, says, "Okay, I want you to watch this video." Nobody say a word during the video. He puts the giant old VHS cassette in there, and the video comes on, and there's this guy in a wheelchair, and this officer standing across from us, our buddy, is spraying this guy with pepper spray in the face, and then he backs off, and then he's spraying him again. And then he backs off, and the guy charges him with the wheelchair, and he pulls his baton out, and he hits the side of the chair, and he hits him in the arm, and then a park policeman comes from the side, and he sprays him with the pepper spray, and then finally somebody grabs him and pulls this handicapped man out of the wheelchair and throws him on the ground. Now, based on what I just described to you, what did you see?
Abuse of power, and like everything.
Yeah,
every rule broken.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So the reality was, which you can't see right away in the video, and the video was shot by a tourist who did a pretty good job actually, and immediately gave the video to the Secret Service with the promise of a tour. So anyway, what you couldn't see was this guy was mentally ill. We all recognized him. He lived in the park. He had fashion, on the bottom of a wheelchair in the front. A standard wheelchair, not like a sport wheelchair. They have those metal things that come down that your feet sit on.
Yeah, the little pedals.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. They flip on. So anyway, on the ends of those, he had fashioned them into knives, and he was ramming tourists, and he injured somebody really bad, cut the Achilles. God. He was trying to ram the officers. So when the video comes on, like it's in the middle, it's at the height of the incident. There's already been confrontation. They've already went through the whole use of force. I mean, I will tell you that if he had hit me with that chair in the front of my foot like he did, I mean, I might have taken that baton. I wouldn't have drawn my pistol, but I might have taken the baton, and instead of using it as intermediate force, I might have hit him in the head with it. Because. And what the officer didn't know is that the people that he had injured, like they hadn't come forward yet. They were being treated on the other side. So anyway, all this came together. But so that's my point to that story is to give you an example of, oh my God, my friend's going to jail for police brutality, and Christ, he was, not only did he do the right thing, but he was so, it was like textbook, man. And then he would attack him, and he would back off, and then with the baton, and then he would back. He did just like we were taught. And he couldn't check him with his hand because he was in a wheelchair, but he jumped back and he would give the guy time to react. Okay, I'm going to hurt you. Give up. Stop. And he kept attacking. And so anyway, so that's just an example. And the other one was. It was I have a note here. It says White House lockup, but I can't remember what the story was. It was just about demonstrations. And I just want to reiterate, too, that this about my former coworkers. They are good at what they do. They are human. They're going to be tired. They're going to be exhausted, but they are good at what they do. And they have a system. They have a system for almost every scenario. If the demonstration starts in the White House during a tour, which was very common. If it starts on the outside, I was there when they threw a dead body over the fence, and they stood there and poured blood, real blood, over themselves and called George Bush a murderer because he would not put more money on top of the billions they were already spending on HIV. And the ironic thing is years later, when all these drugs came out, that I understand do a really good job of retarding and curing in some cases.
Oh no, we can't say that word. Go ahead.
What's that?
Retarding.
Yeah. Well, I use it all the time.
I know.
So do we. So yeah, and curing HIV or fighting it. And now these same people that called the drug companies murder and called Congress murderers and Bush murderers, they're now suing the drug companies because years later they think these drugs may have caused cancer. So it's just kind of ironic. But anyway, so these lockups, they happen all the time, and these demonstrations. Now, what they're seeing today is at the top of the level is what we saw. I mean, I'm sure these young guys, who some of them were children when I was in Seattle during the World Trade Organization and the Battle of Seattle happened, and they were just children, or some of them might not even been born, but they were shown those videos, and they were trained on that stuff, and they know that these people are hard. Not the demonstrators. There's three things going on. You have demonstrators, you have anarchists that are full out communists, and then you have somebody orchestrating them that's not going to get hurt, who motivates these people, who's not there when it's happening. And then you have the innocent bystander. You have an innocent bystander who happens to be walking around the White House who gets caught up. And then you have the protester who sees the anarchist, and it's exciting to him, and he wants to feel like he's doing something. And for a small moment in time, he lapses into that anarchist, and he helps push him over the fence. And then when he gets locked up for aiding and abetting, he immediately feels remorse, and he feels terrible. And so those are the people you're dealing with. The hardcore director who is trying to push this communism and push this anarchy. You have the actors that are trained probably almost as well as the Secret Service. I mean, they have training camps for them. And then you have the real protester who wants to stand there with a picture of George Floyd. Wants to stand there and wants to cry. And that's great. That's what protest is about. But then you have these other people that are taking advantage of it. And my coworkers can discern who they are. These people, when it's happening and you take that breath and you look and you go, you can tell who the hardcore ones are. And you can tell who the ones that got swept up in the moment. So, okay, that's all I have.
Yeah, I want to thank you. I mean, we went a very long time. And
yeah, I'm sorry about that.
No, not at all. I mean, this for one thing. So to clarify, this video is we are going to be writing an article about it for American Greatness, which you happen to use the phrase American Greatness during one of your answers. So thank you for that.
You should get a bonus.
I mean, this. Let me tell you something. Writing is not a lucrative profession at the moment.
You're preaching to the choir.
So yeah. But yeah, so Gary has a YouTube channel. A lot of this stuff, and I just put it in the chat. A lot of
Thank
stuff
you.
has more to do with firearms, both safety and practical equipment and stuff like that. Let me swing it over here so you can see it here. And that's actually being censored a lot on YouTube lately. So if you want to go
Yeah.
check that out, I don't know if you use alternative media. I use Library and BitChute, which are YouTube alternatives as
I have
well.
not done that yet. I
Yeah,
also have a website, official Gary J. Byrne, and some merchandise books on there, and some most of the other stuff is on there. So, thank you so much.
yeah. I mean, it's always great to talk to you, and I wish, the attitude, you bring this attitude to all your interviews, where you're more, you're sharing the details. I think a lot of people would probably want to know. I wish it was like a more common, like part of the culture of the government,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, we live in the world we do. But yeah, thanks again, and I will send you that draft when I,
Thank you.
write that article. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Hey, before you hang up, I like the glasses. They're sharp.
I lost these like a few months ago. I didn't know where they were, and turns out it was in like a car that I was using.
Okay.
So I just I bought these like a few years ago, and they're pretty good outside, but I think I need a new prescription. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Well, I
these are
like
like
them.
5 years old.
Thanks again.
Yeah, no problem. Great to talk to you as always. We'll be
Looking
in
forward to
touch.
the next time. Whenever you need us, you call us.
Absolutely. And say hi to
Thanks
Grant
again.
too.
I will. Thank you so much.
Take it easy. Oh, one last thing.
Yeah.
One of my viewers, Larry Gerke, he said
Yeah.
he wants to salute you. He's a U.S. Navy veteran, and he wanted to salute you as a fellow serviceman.
Oh, thank you so much. Salute right back, please. That's very kind of him.
All right. So yeah, I'll be in touch, and everybody, please like, share, and subscribe. You can also find me on all of these other media platforms: YouTube, BitChute, Minds.com, Subscribestar, and Gab, and Library. And I'll talk to you later. Have a great day. See you later,
Thank you.
Gary.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.